This recording is Chapter 4, Part 1 of 3, the tissue level of organization. We know that cells with a common function join together to form tissues. There are four main tissue types in the human body. Epithelial tissue is the tissue that covers exposed surfaces both externally and internally. Therefore, it lines internal passageways and chambers as well as produces glandular secretions. My skin is a great example of epithelial tissue. Connective tissue is tissue that connects things together. Therefore, it fills internal spaces and helps to provide structural support as well as protection and is capable of transporting things and storing energy. Muscle tissue helps to move our skeleton. It also provides movement for the heart as the heart contracts and moves other hollow organs. Nervous tissue is that type of tissue that is specialized to conduct electrical impulses to carry information to muscles and glands. By the time an embryo has been in existence for about 16 days, we notice that there are three very specific layers of embryonic tissue. This embryonic tissue consists of endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm. All three layers of this embryo will contribute to epithelial tissue throughout the body. Looking more closely, we can see that muscle and connective tissue is mostly derived from mesoderm. Nervous tissue is mostly derived from ectoderm. But again, all three layers, endoderm, ectoderm, and mesoderm, will contribute to epithelial tissue. In this slide, we can see the three embryonic germ layers and other structures into which those germ layers will differentiate. For instance, the ectoderm gives rise to the epidermis as well as glands on the skin. It also will differentiate into some of the cranial bones, the pituitary gland, the adrenal medulla, which is the inner portion of the adrenal gland, the nervous system, and the mouth between the cheek and gums, as well as the anus. The mesoderm will start to differentiate to become connective tissue proper, bone, cartilage, blood, the endothelium of blood vessels, which is the inner lining of blood vessels, muscle, synovial membranes, which line synovial cavities in synovial joints, serous membranes that line body cavities, as well as kidneys and the lining of gonads. The endoderm lines airways and the digestive system, except for the mouth and distal part of the digestive system, which includes the rectum and anal canal, and also will differentiate into digestive glands, endocrine glands, and the adrenal cortex, which is the outer portion of the adrenal gland. You'll notice in this slide that our epithelial tissue can be joined to underlying connective tissue to form a structure known as a membrane. There are three types of covering and lining membranes that involve epithelial tissue, including mucous membranes, serous membranes, and cutaneous membranes. Mucous membranes have special cells within them that will produce mucus, and serous membranes we know are going to produce serous fluid that helps to reduce friction and provides lubrication for organs inside the ventral body cavities. Cutaneous membranes are what we see on the outside of our body. Your skin is a cutaneous membrane. Now, some authors will say that the synovial membrane is a lining membrane and therefore is made up of, it's considered an epithelial membrane. Others consider it a connective tissue membrane. So that's not anything that you need to concern yourselves with, whether it's connective or epithelial, because there is a difference in opinions for synovial membranes. However, you will notice in this picture, even though there's a source that says it's connective tissue, it's lined with epithelium. Before we go further into tissues, let's look at cellular junctions, understanding that a junction is simply where two or more things are joined together. Tight junctions are special junctions that are formed between cells in certain areas of the body where the adjacent membranes of the cells are literally knit together by membrane proteins, which we can see in this picture. And tight junctions are found in the epithelial lining of the intestines as well as the urinary bladder. They're also found in capillaries, which are the smallest blood vessels in the body. In fact, the tight junctions in the capillaries that go through the brain help form part of the blood-brain barrier. And these tight junctions, knitting the two membranes of these adjacent cells together, help to prevent the passage of water and solutes between the cells. When we look at cells that are adjacent to one another, we can see that the cells have to have some kind of connection to underlying connective tissue. And so the base of the cell that joins to the underlying connective tissue, that is referred to as the basal surface of the cell, whereas the opposite surface of the cell to which nothing is attached is known as the apical surface or free surface, because that's the surface that actually lines the inner portion of the lumen, which is the inner lining of a tubular passageway. We also have an apical surface on the outside of our skin because there's nothing on top of these cells. The tight junctions are going to be found between the cells near the apex of the cells, knitting them together to help prevent the basolateral surfaces of the cells, baso meaning base, lateral meaning sides. So it helps prevent the basolateral surfaces from being exposed to different substances. So it's protecting this area in between the cells by having those tight junctions toward the apical surface. Desmosomes are special junctions that can be found in the skin as well as in cardiac muscle tissue. By the way, in cardiac muscle tissue, desmosomes are found in special structures called intercalated discs. Intercalated discs include desmosomes and gap junctions. The desmosomes are important because they're very strong. They can resist forces of stretching and twisting, and the reason that is because they have a very Velcro-like configuration that holds them very tightly together. And desmosomes help to connect the cytoskeletons of adjacent cells together. When cells are lost, especially in the skin, they tend to come off in sheets because the desmosomes are still holding them together. We see this in people who have been sunburnt very badly. They'll often peel off in sheets because of those desmosomes. We can see, looking at this picture, we've got in purple the plasma membrane of two adjacent cells. The desmosomes include a protein disc or plaque on either side, and you can see the anchoring proteins that are found and the link proteins that help to link them together. And the intermediate filaments projecting from the protein plaque are going to join with the cytoskeleton of the cell inside the cytoplasm. Gap junctions, we said, are found in cardiac muscle. They're also found in smooth muscle. The smooth muscle of our intestines has a lot of gap junctions, and this allows for intercellular, between the cells, communication. It allows the passage of ions from cell to cell to coordinate function. The particular function of the heart is rhythmic contraction. The particular function in our intestines is a special wave-like contraction that occurs and is known as peristalsis. In gap junctions, we see special proteins, membrane proteins, that are called connexons. These connexons connect to form a channel that allows ions to pass. Remember, ions have a charge. So if ions are flowing from one cell to the other, that can create a flow of electricity. In this slide, we see tight junctions, again, towards the apical surface between the sides of the cells. By the way, tight junctions can also be found in cells that make up the tubules of the kidneys. We see gap junctions that are located a little bit further down along the sides of adjacent cells. By the way, for test purposes, I'm not going to ask you for specific sites of these junctions. That's too much minutia, but just to give you a better mental picture of how these things are put together. Finally, we talked about desmosomes, which are one of three kinds of anchoring junctions. Remember, desmosomes are sometimes referred to as spot welds, where two cells are welded together, or they have a very Velcro-like configuration because they hold cells together very tightly. The reason being is they consist of a plaque protein on the inner portion of one cell membrane with intermediate filaments, protein filaments called keratin, extending into the cytoplasm to join to the cytoskeleton of that cell. Then there are transmembrane proteins. So there are proteins that extend from the plaque in between the two membranes of these adjacent cells. These transmembrane proteins have a special name. They're actually glycoproteins that are referred to as cadherins. That's their name. And so the cadherin transmembrane proteins of this desmosome are going to attach to the desmosome plaque protein and transmembrane cadherins of the adjacent cell. So here's the opposite plaque protein and the intermediate filaments that are going to bind to the cytoskeleton of that cell inside that cell's cytoplasm. There are also special anchoring junctions referred to as adherins. Adherins are special anchoring junctions because they have actin filaments, and actin filaments can move and change shape, and so the adherens junctions can actually help change the shape of the epithelial tissue, and they can also be involved in changing the shape of cells during mitosis. Finally, we get to hemidesmosome. So if a desmosome is a structure that involves the plaque protein on one cell linked to a plaque protein on an adjacent cell, a hemidesmosome is half of that. That is going to link a cell to the underlying basement membrane, and specifically the basal lamina of the basement membrane. Epithelial tissue, or epithelia, we already know covers internal and external surfaces. So that means it's going to be found in the skin, in digestive, respiratory, urinary, and reproductive tracts, and also in glands. It's actually, glands are derived from epithelial tissue, but the secretory cells within glands are the ones that are going to predominate. There are two different kinds of glands. We have endocrine glands, which will actually produce and secrete a product by way of exocytosis into the extracellular fluid surrounding those cells, where it will either be picked up by the bloodstream or the lymphatic fluid to travel to target organs. There are also exocrine glands, which will secrete their products onto the body surfaces or into body cavities. So that's the difference between endocrine and exocrine glands. An example of an endocrine gland would be the thyroid gland or the pituitary gland. Those are going to secrete hormones or chemical messengers that are going to travel through the bloodstream and get to specific target organs. Exocrine glands, your sweat glands, are a great example of exocrine glands. Salivary glands are another good example of exocrine glands. Epithelial tissue has cells that are almost entirely linked or bound together. We already talked about the fact that there is an apical surface, where that's the surface of the cells that is exposed. That's also sometimes referred to as the free surface, because there's nothing attached to it. Then the bottom portion of epithelial cells is referred to as the basal surface. And in these cells, the organelles are unevenly distributed. The epithelial tissue is going to be found attached to a thin, non-living layer called the basement membrane. The basement membrane actually has more layers. It's more than just the basal lamina. We'll talk about that in just a second. So the free surface is going to be what we can see covering and lining surfaces. Like you can see the free surface of your skin. And epithelial tissue lacks blood vessels and has to have diffusion as a means to get nutrition and oxygen to those cells, and diffusion to get rid of carbon dioxide and waste products from those cells. Epithelial tissue is also continuously replaced by stem cells. So there's a lot of regeneration that goes on with epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue has a lot of different functions depending on the type of epithelial tissue. We'll look at the different types. It can provide protection. It can control permeability. It can provide sensation. It can also produce specialized secretions. The functions of epithelial tissue are going to be determined by different things. If some cells have the structure of having cilia, remember cilia are like long extensions, like your arms, that will beat rhythmically to move substances, usually in the form of mucus, across the surface of the cell, which are much different than tiny little microvilli. Compare your cilia as arms to microvilli as fingers, which increase surface area of the plasma membrane for absorption. So where we have cilia, we're going to see associated with mucus in areas like respiratory and reproductive tracts, versus microvilli for absorption and secretion we would find in certain areas of the intestines or the kidneys. When we want to make sure we're pulling back from what could be urine, we want to maybe pull back some solutes. Other specializations include, as we already mentioned, secretions that might be produced by endocrine or exocrine glands. Some cells are specialized in and of the fact that they produce a waterproofing protein known as keratin. Keratin not only helps to make cells waterproof, it also helps to make them harder. And as we mentioned before, goblet cells are specialized cells to produce mucus. So it's very common to see goblet cells and cilia located in the same area because the cilia are responsible for moving the mucus across the surface of the cell. As we talked about before, the epithelial cells are going to be attached to a thin non-living layer called the basement membrane. The basement membrane is made up of two layers, and the word lamina means layer. There's a basal lamina and a reticular lamina. Remember, whenever your brain hears the word reticular or reticulum, that is pertaining to a network. The basal lamina is close to the basal surface of the epithelial cells, and the basal lamina consists of two portions. The lamina lucida, which is the clear layer, that layer contains glycoproteins and fine collagen fibers. Remember, collagen is the most abundant protein in the human body. The lamina densa, dense layer, is going to have more bundles of collagen fibers. So the lamina lucida and the lamina densa make up the basal lamina, and deep to the basal lamina is our reticular lamina. Again, the word reticular means pertaining to a network. So the basement membrane helps to act as a barrier or filter, gives strength, allows diffusion of nutrients and water, and provides a surface for the cells to divide. When we look at epithelial tissue, it is constantly exposed to different things like chemicals, enzymes, bacteria, abrasive forces. Just think of your skin and all the abrasion that it is exposed to, the different chemicals to which it is exposed, bacteria. And because our epithelial tissue is constantly exposed to different things, it has stem cells, which are also referred to as germinative cells, which will continually divide to replace the cells that are on the apical surface as they may wear out. Cells are going to be rapidly replaced in places like the intestines as well as your skin. And these stem cells or germinative cells are going to be located near the basement membrane. If we look at this particular slide, the basement membrane is right here between the epithelial tissue and the underlying connective tissue. Make sure as you're learning about tissues that for each tissue you know its structure, its location, and its function. That will take us to the end of this first recording. I'm going to go on to the next.